Hey, good afternoon, church family. I hope that your week is going well. Really hope you got out this morning early and enjoyed the coolness of the day after 100 degrees yesterday. Last week I finished up the book of Jonah and the story of the reluctant prophet. Thought we might switch gears a bit and look at another narrative, Old Testament narrative story for the next few weeks. I want us to just think about the world in its current state. Chaos, confusion, animosities, natural disasters, shortages of food, strange occurrences, families struggling to kind of make sense of things. If there's any leaders at all, they're not good. As a matter of fact, there seems to be a great void of leadership at times and in places. It just sounds familiar, doesn't it? It's troubling. And we look for light and we look for bright spots in times of stress and darkness and chaos, confusion, and despair. And this time in our history is not unique to human history. There's been times like this before. Obviously, context a little bit different, events maybe a little different, but the same sentiment. And there's a time in our history as humanity that the Bible records for us that was not dissimilar to things going on with us today, especially the emotional aspects of that and just how we deal with it and the lack of just something good to hang on to in our culture. Throughout the book of Judges, there is a phrase that is repeated that is troubling because it is a phrase that has been embodied throughout human history in different levels of intensity, but it's there. It's been worded different too. So in the book of Judges, you begin to see this phrase repeated. In those days, there was no king, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. That is, that my needs are greater than the needs of the community. My truth is my truth, and I need you to agree with it. It's mine. My desires outweigh the desires of God or others or the community in which we live in. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. There was a leadership void, for sure. There were enemies of God that were pressing in. There were natural disasters. There was lack of trust and faith in God and the people of God throughout the book of Judges. It's really dark. Sad news is that cycle repeated itself for 350 to 400 years in the history of God's people. But every now and again, throughout the book of Judges, there's a bright spot. And one of those bright spots is recorded in another book, a separate book, that we know simply as Ruth. It is a powerful book of hope and a powerful book of redemption, a powerful book of love and commitment and faithfulness. It's an interesting story. It's a love story, but it's way, way bigger than that because ultimately it's a love story about God's love for creation and God's protecting hope through the Messiah. It's an interesting book because it has interesting characters in it. We are introduced to 4 or 5 main characters in this book. Elimelech is one of the first ones that we're introduced to. He's a family patriarch, family leader. His name means "my God is king." Well, that's got the makings of a good story, I think. Somebody who's the first character that we meet in the plot of a story, whose name has to deal with the lordship of God and the sovereignty and the rule and reign of God. And we meet his wife, Naomi, and her name is Pleasant. Listen, this story has a great beginning to it. A man and a wife who are pleasantly living together with God as their king. They have 2 children, 2 sons. Mahlon, whose name unfortunately means sickness or sick, and another child named Chilion, whose name means spent or used up. So maybe not quite so fairy tale-ish when we first read it. And so these characters begin the narrative of the story of Ruth. Later, we certainly will be introduced to the title character, Ruth, and her sister, Orpah. And then another character who we're introduced to a little bit later in the book by the name of Boaz, who is not only significant to the book of Ruth, but significant to us still today. And so this story of Ruth is set in the time frame of the Judges, as I referenced a moment ago, a time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Most likely, there's a couple of different thoughts about exactly when it might take place. Some think during the period around the judgeship of Gideon, which you read about in Judges 6 through 9. Some think it's around the time of Jephthah, which would be Judges 11 and 12, just prior to the Samson period. But it's we don't know who wrote it in its written form, but the story is so heartwarming and so bright in a time of darkness, in a time of despair, in a time of hopelessness. I thought it might do us some good over the next few weeks to just go back and revisit this tremendous story of God's love in a time period when the world wasn't very good, wasn't a great place to live. And so I just want to start out reading the first few verses today, and we'll make a few comments on that and just work our way through the book of Ruth over the next few weeks. Ruth 1, beginning in verse 1. In the days when judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were from Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went to the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And they took Moabite wives. The name of one of them was Orpah, and the other Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion had died. And so the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So this story that starts out so promising with the name of a patriarch and matriarch of a family, the pleasant woman married to the man whose king was God, really turned quickly. There's a couple of things that we could say perhaps about Elimelech, why he fled Judah because of the famine and went to Moabite. There were certainly prohibitions against that in Torah to go to another land. There would be prohibitions against their sons marrying foreign women. One of the things I found really interesting about just the literary structure of this first part of Ruth is they lived in Bethlehem, right? The city of David, where Jesus would eventually be born. And the name literally means, Bethlehem, means the house of food or the house of bread. And so it's ironic that you have a pleasant couple with God as their king who live in a place called the house of bread in which there is no bread to eat. And I guess, church, when we think about our world and about our circumstances, when our physical needs become scarce and they're not there, and the basic necessities of life aren't there, how our thoughts begin to run and look for where can I go for comfort, and where can I go for hope, and where do I find help? And sometimes in desperation, we make choices without thinking them all the way through, and I think Elimelech might be guilty of that. So there was food in Moab, but there were other things in Judah that perhaps maybe that this family could have looked to, but they don't. I do believe this, that God is with them, even in their sojourn in Moab, despite the hardship of death that happens there. So here's this pleasant woman who now has 2 foreign daughters-in-laws or daughters-in-law. She has no husband. She has no heirs. And she's a woman who lives in a patriarchal society and has very little rights and very little hope. And now she's in a foreign country, and she's got to decide what to do. So the fairy tale that started out so bright turned dark in a hurry. It is that way in life sometimes. Life turns quickly. We've experienced a lot of highs and lows and ups and downs, emotionally and spiritually and financially in the last few months. And it does cause us to wonder sometime, where is God in all this? Can we find God in the midst of dark times? And I would suggest to you as we begin the study of Ruth, the answer is definitively yes. That God, through God's sovereignty and God's majesty and God's involvement in humanity, will send us these rays of light in dark times. And so in this period of the Judges, in this period of Naomi's life where everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong, we are introduced to God's ray of light in the person of this lovely woman named Ruth, who ends up being so critical to us today and to the salvation history of God and God's redemptive plan for humanity. And she's a big part of that. And so I hope that your world's a little brighter today than it was a few days ago. And what I hope is that we will look to the activity of God and the ongoing presence of God in our world and see where God shows up and how God shows up. Because sometimes God shows up in the strangest of circumstances through the most unlikely of characters, and they teach us about the love and the redemption and the goodness of God. So I look forward to the next few weeks as we work through the book of Ruth. We'll try to finish up chapter 1 next week and then go from there. God bless you all. We really enjoyed seeing a lot of you on the last couple of Sundays. Feel certain that we'll see more folks this week. For those who aren't ready to come back and still are in a compromised position health-wise, we certainly want you to continue to join us as we stream live this coming Sunday. God bless you. My thoughts and prayers are with you. For those who I haven't had the opportunity to see face-to-face, I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.